Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming along to the Africa Unicorn Effect panel. My name is Yinka Adegoke. I am the Africa editor of Quartz. We are a digital platform that is a global publication. We cover the new global economy. I have a focus on Africa in particular. And our coverage of Africa has always emphasized innovation and new ideas and new things that people are doing across a wide range of fields. I am very excited because every year we put out a list of 30 exceptional people who are doing amazing and inspiring things usually in the lines of business and entrepreneurship, but in many fields. And I'm particularly excited today because we put out the 2017 list, which you can find at qz.com/Africa17 or qz.com, Africa17. And I think the thing I'm most excited about is the fact that this panel has 3 sets of our Africa innovators from 2015, 2016, and 2017. So I'm just going to start by introducing them right away. Right to my left is Matsi Modise of Simodisa. What do you call yourself? An entrepreneurship activist
yes.
in South Africa. We have Shiro Waweru from Kenya, who is an entrepreneur with a business called Fun Kids, an amazing furniture manufacturer, and she's going to talk a little bit about that and much of the other stuff she does. And our friend Bright Simons from Ghana of M Pedigree. Again, another, your business is diversified so much, I don't want to narrow it down, so I'm going to let you spell that out again. And congratulations to our latest, one of the 30 people on our new Africa Innovators list, Rafalang Rabana from Rekindle Learning, also here in South Africa, but I think originally from Botswana. So thank you all for being here. What we want to sort of get into, because the topic that we have, Africa, the Africa Unicorn Effect, tries to capture this idea that there are these out there, particularly in the United States, there are these companies that are being valued at $1 billion, funded by mainly by venture capital money, and they tend to be tech companies. And if you think about them, they're the obvious ones, your Ubers and Spotify's and people like that. And there have been a couple of them, I think there are about 220 of them in the United States right now. Here in Africa, there probably has been 1 or 2. In particular, I think the most obvious one is Africa Internet Group, and who were funded to a tune of about $1 billion. InterSwitch was also another one, a tech company in Nigeria that was close to doing an IPO for about that valuation. But for our discussion, I just want us to talk about the role of innovation in eventually getting to that place where there might be billion-dollar companies on the continent. I'm going to start with you, Bright. For some reason, I just feel that this one is for you. What does innovation mean to you and to your business? What role does it have?
So I guess for a lot of companies, that can be a philosophical question. In our case, it's much more practical because when we set out to do what we do, there was no other company in the world doing it the way that we did it. And in 2004, thereabouts, I was in Europe. I wanted to come back to Africa. I wanted to contribute something more practical. I was thinking that I was going to set up a system that would enable African farmers to sell their products, particularly agricultural products, of course, for 3 to 4 times what we're getting now by simply providing a means to do organic certification at the cheapest way possible. Okay. Because this was a time when, to do To do certification in Africa, we will require consultants coming in from Germany and the rest of it, and it was extremely expensive. Eventually, we didn't do the organic certification, but the same technology was used to enable consumers to validate products and to confirm whether those products are genuine or not.
I see.
In a very simple sense, that means that you provide them with a tool of empowerment that helps them defend themselves against knockoffs and the rest. That system has had to continually develop. And now we call ourselves trust engineers. We are in the business of trust engineering. We believe that we are at the very cutting edge of producing systems that enable people to be able to validate not simply whether the product they are getting is genuine or not, but whether a particular transaction, is genuine or not. What does innovation mean in that context? It means, therefore, that it doesn't matter where you're operating from. It's entirely possible that, notwithstanding very huge resource limitations, you will still be world-leading. And let me validate that point. When we started, Europe was also on the verge of trying to do similar things. There's a program called FPIA, and this was very much focused on pharmaceuticals. So if I get a pack of medicine, an anti-malaria, in Europe, more likely, I get a pack of medicine for diabetes, insulin, or something like that. Right. Will I be able to confirm that it came from the original source? The truth is, today, you can do that in Nigeria, but you can't do that in Sweden, where the first pilot in Europe happened a number of years after us. So Nigeria is the only country in the world where, for a particular category of medicines, in this case, anti-malarials and antibiotic, you can walk into a pharmacy, pick up any random pack, and you'll be able to certify the chain through which that medicine traveled from the factory through the ports onto the shelf. That is world unique. To my mind, that is very obvious innovation. The fact that you can do that in Nigeria. The second point is also that we achieved that at a capital investment of about 1%, what the equivalent cost in Europe is. So innovation in that sense is not merely newness or novelty. It's also extreme productivity. Right. It's also extreme efficiency.
Right. I'm going to just ask the same question to Rapelang. What it means to you and to your business.
Sure, thank you very much. I think there's a couple of ways you can look at innovation, on a philosophical and on a practical level. On a philosophical level, for me, it's always about believing that the world should be a different way. And the different way is that's often more efficient and more effective. And certainly as an entrepreneur, that's something that I've applied through businesses. In my first business, we came out of university. The cost of telecommunications was so high, and we just thought that there should be a cheaper way to communicate. And that's when we developed some of the earliest versions of mobile voice over IP and what we now know as sort of Viber and WhatsApp calls and the like. And that was back in 2006, and it came from a conviction. So I think innovation at its most basic form is a conviction that something should be better. And certainly that's what I've carried through. On a practical level for myself, in my current business now, innovation is the tool that really helps us close serious gaps in our socioeconomic situation. And in the learning and education space in Africa, I think it's one of the most critical things to make sure that we achieve inclusive growth, that we can take everyone along with us in that growth. And we need to develop skills and educate people faster than we've ever done before if we're going to be able to make a difference. So again, starting with the conviction that we should be able to use our technology devices to learn and build skills better is kind of where we started there. And using very simple methodologies of combining the best we know about learning science and the best we know about how the mind works and learns, and actually putting that into a technology solution that companies can use, that universities can use to learn faster. And we've been quite effective in changing how quickly people can assimilate knowledge. So for example, typically companies might put, training manuals out, 300-page manuals or 2-day training workshops, and you hope everyone's learned something, and you have tea and coffee at the end, and it's sort of all over. Yeah. And no one really knows what you know. And we need to sort of change all of that if companies are going to be able to perform, or even academic institutions. So we essentially repackage that kind of content into interactive micro-learning steps, so little learning nuggets, sort of in a digital flashcard. That is question-based, and it adapts to how you're performing until you actually demonstrate that you've retained the content. And it supports you until you actually have taken in the corrective feedback and retained that content. And that dramatically improves the way people retain the knowledge. And we've seen pass rates improve by over 50% just by packaging content in a different way. And I think it also speaks to the fact that many young people don't come from a strong learning background. So it takes an incredible amount of discipline to master a 300-page manual on your own accord just by reading. And we need to provide a great deal more support in that respect. So on a practical level, that's how we're looking at doing innovation there, and it covers all kinds of areas from compliance and financial services to improving your English skills at university so that you can actually assimilate the content there. And that's how we're going to be able to make these leaps and bounds that we need to be able to make for the continent to get where it needs to get to.
No, thank you so much. Shiro, I am very familiar with your business and what you do, but and I'm almost, it's a bit of a shame that we don't have some of the pictures of your amazing furniture, but I'm always fascinated by this idea of what inspired you to start that type of business. Much of the talk, this conference and many other conferences is often about the impact of technology in a very specific way. I know you use technology in your business, but you're thinking about it differently. So I just want to hear about how, again, the role of innovation in pushing Fun Kids forward.
Thanks, Ika. So my business is called Fun Kids. We're an innovative children's brand based in Nairobi, Kenya. And what we look at is the children of Africa and the world. We know that in the States or in the developed parts of the world, children's business is big business. But in Africa, for some reason, where we actually do have quite a number of kids, we don't seem to have focused on things to do with their safety, starting from the furniture. Conversations around education are big, but we're not doing it any differently. So for example, we have a program called Kids Go Tech, and where we teach children actually how to innovate. We've been discussing the fourth industrial revolution. How's that going to happen if we've not started teaching children how to do that anyway? I don't know what we're saying. And it's not because it's a nice to do thing, it's because the continent needs to start manufacturing their own products. We know there's a lot of amazing stuff happening on the software space. Yeah. But what about hardware? Every day I keep saying we've never even made a light bulb in Africa. This is 2017. Yes, we have all sorts of other technologies, but if you're looking at the woman or the student in a rural village, let them learn how to make their own lights to start with. So when we look at also the furniture that they use, right from when they're babies, the baby cot, the furniture for children in Africa is so unsafe, it's unbelievable. It's uninspiring. So we set up a factory where we actually manufacture very safe, very funky, but very functional furniture. Our homes tend to have minimum 3 children, a cousin, somebody else. So we have triple, quadruple decker beds. It's practical. We all need to be in one room, right? We're looking at the safety. Kind of big boned. The cots need to be heavier. And what's with this brown furniture that depicts Africa? Not brown. Children love color. So we're changing that. And we're saying butterflies are universal for girls, right? Color, blue, green. Why aren't we doing this on the continent? Our children deserve better. So I know last year, Quartz quoted us being the IKEA of Africa. We are correcting it. We are the Fun Kids of the world. The fact that we flat pack furniture is not new to the rest of the world, but for Africa, we're like geniuses. Yet it just makes sense because you need to transport it on what we call a boda on a motorbike. You just need to pack it and take it upstairs. So we're looking at different ways of manufacturing. I can see in the audience one of our suppliers. We do printing on furniture. In Kenya, we are like, oh my God, you print on your furniture. We say, yes, how do you get consistency? How do you get the right color? You must use technology. I'm a creative, I believe in art, but to scale, it can't be by hand. Right. If we get an order for 10 or 100, we can guarantee the exact same artwork because of the technologies. We have CNC routers. We're not engineers, but we are creatives in the manufacturing space who use engineering technology. So again, if we want a perfect flower shape for a bed or a product, it will be because we draw it, and then we can cut it to the nearest perfection possible. We need to do this, but we need to do this at scale. We're talking about creating jobs, education. We must combine the two, and I use the word leapfrog literally. We need to start doing this last century for the continent. So that's what we look at in terms of innovation. It's how to look at, we've targeted children 0 to 16. What innovative products, doesn't have to be taking them to the moon, but products that they use every day, right from educational comics to an app later to AI. Before Oculus came, we've prototyped a robot that will have holograms. Shaka Zulu should appear in class during a history lesson.
Right.
So that it's unforgettable education, it's experiential. We will never forget those lessons. So it's how we look at products for children from a different perspective.
No, thanks for that, Shira. Matsi, you're the person who's advising entrepreneurs, and obviously, in your role, entrepreneurs to do the amazing things that the people on this panel are trying to do or have done, they need funds, and when they have these ideas, as amazing as they might be, particularly if they're completely original, there will always be concerns about intellectual property and as for an investor, and how you protect that intellectual property. Generally we have these laws on the continent, but I'm not often certain that they are always followed through when it comes to IP. What are the things that you look at, or the advice you give the type of people on the panel on how to ensure that going forward the value that you're thinking about in their business will come to fruition?
Sure. So I'll touch a little bit on the question that you posed to my fellow panelists first around innovation and what it talks to regarding the organization that I run, which is Simodisa. Essentially, innovation is about, finding a solution to a problem. It's about creating a clear value proposition. And running an industry association is probably something that people think, well, it's a formalized body. But for us, it was about how do we create an ecosystem? How do we connect entrepreneurs to opportunities? How do we connect them to information? How do we connect them to funding? And one of the initiatives that we have created at Simodisa is about creating a digital ecosystem, which is essentially curated by the various parties within the ecosystem. And digital for us means that you could be anywhere in the world, you could be anywhere in the country, you could be in the rural areas, you could be in the urban areas, and whatever information that is available, whatever funding is available, whatever opportunities is available, it's accessible and it's scalable. So creating this Venture Central essentially was our solution and our innovation around how do you connect entrepreneurs to opportunities and this information. And talking around IP and exchange control, I think it's very, very important that we create an enabling environment. There's a role for everybody to play within ecosystems. Government lays the rules. They essentially put together these regulations. However, we need to ensure that these regulations are progressive. They're actually helping entrepreneurs and not inhibiting entrepreneurs. And I can speak from a South African perspective that in South Africa, we have a lot of innovations that we ourselves have not been able to explore and discover because we haven't done a good job at selling ourselves as an epicenter of innovation on the continent. And we realize that some of the reasons is around the regulations that we have. They're not making South Africa attractive. They're actually making other entrepreneurs go to places such as Silicon Valley and various other enabling ecosystems globally. And we're not necessarily able to capture the essence of South African or African solutions for global problems.
Right.
And we've identified that, some of the policies that have been put in place are not enabling. So, as an industry association that is, engaging the public and the private sector around how do we help entrepreneurs around.
So are you lobbying the government?
We
or
always are lobbying the government. So since 2013, when we were established, we had a framework of policies that are going to nurture high impact, high growth SMEs.
Right.
And part of it was IP and exchange control. We also had visas, or perhaps an introduction of entrepreneurship visas. Right. We looked at labor laws, how are they enabling entrepreneurs, because we can't treat a startup the same way we're treating a big company. I mean, a big company has a marketing division, has a finance division, has an HR division. However, when it comes to labor laws, they're very, very restrictive. So those are some of the lobbying opportunities that we always engaging. But in terms of IP and exchange control, since we started in 2013, we've been able to shift the dial, because in the last budget speech by our former finance minister, they were able to say that, well, we understand that for a person to register IP in South Africa, they have to go through certain loops. They have to go through certain requirements that are actually inhibiting them to want to keep it in South Africa. But in the last budget speech, they've been able to say, we're going to reduce those restrictions. And so we're finding that now a lot of technology entrepreneurs are having a sense of comfort that they don't necessarily have to go the loops and bounds of registering the IP in South Africa.
Right. No, that's really, I mean, that's really interesting, because over the last 2.5 years since I've been in this role, one of the things that keeps on coming up generally is the issue of regulation on the continent in different countries. And, you know, the emphasis is in different areas. I mean, what's been your experience, Bright?
So I guess it starts from a very fundamental misconception that people have about technology. They think technology is an industry. They don't see technology as something mainstreamed across every category of our lives.
Exactly.
So there's this sense that it's a fringe thing, and therefore, you know, the bandwidth of a minister, you know, dedicating the bandwidth of a minister to some technology issues is about exotica. You know, these funny people with their funny apps. But there is a very important point we need to note, which is this. I think a couple of days ago, so the extreme, there are two extremes, really. One extreme is that technology is, and it all stems from the same idea of it being a particular industry, a fringe industry. One extreme is that technology is so different that we are leapfrogging because technology is one little domain of the economy that is showing the way. And it sounds good, but it's actually an extreme. The other extreme is that, look, we have a continent where people can't eat. You know, they literally can't find food. We have a continent where, you know, I remember there was a time in Nigeria, the total amount of power from the grid you could get in a month was like 12 hours. Like the whole month. Yeah. The amount of power you could get from the grid was like 12. So why should a continent like that be talking about apps and stuff like that? So here is the problem. The nature of your technology industry reflects the overall nature of the economy. So the fact that you are seeing fancy little apps or apps that don't seem to be totally transformative is as reflective as the fact that you don't see an agribusiness industry that can feed you. If you have a proper technology industry, it will be essential to your industrialization. Let me give you an example. Take power plants. How much of the cost of developing a power plant do you think is reflective in the software, the firmware, and the engineering blueprints of that power plant? What would be your guess?
No idea, to be honest.
You'll be surprised to learn that about 45% of the cost of setting up that power plant, of the cost of running and maintaining that power plant, is technology and engineering related.
I see.
So the fact that you don't have power in Nigeria or Ghana is as indicative of your poor technology status as the fact that your apps don't appear to be as transformative as they should be. The amount of engineering that you need to build a power plant that produces power cheaply enough for you to industrialize is critical. So when you look at Ghana, you find out that the average factory in Ghana, for the same amount of power that the average factory in the US spends. So the average factory in Ghana spends about 38,000 for 100 kilowatts hours of power. The US company spends $6,500. You're not going to industrialize by that. And then you find out that a lot of that is poor engineering and poor technology, including poor power plant software. It fundamentally changes your mindset about what we are talking about. So somebody says, until I can download food. You call me when you can download food. No, you're misunderstanding it. In Kenya, we provide food security solutions because the Kenyan seed industry has some of the most advanced hybrids that they've developed. But there are people that are contaminating that with inflows from China. The Kenyan government has asked us, and from last year, we are tracking every single seed planted in Kenya in order to preserve Kenya's endowment from a food security point of view. Is that not food related? So technology can be so fundamental to all the stuff you're talking about, fourth industrial revolution, radical economic transformation, etc., that to me, the biggest problem, and that is answering your question about regulation,
Yeah.
is that ministers of state, leaders, even business leaders, don't understand that fundamental and integral nature that technology will play to our industrialization, our transformation. That's the problem.
Thanks for that. That's sure. Do you have any thoughts on working with? Because I know you've had some experiences.
Yeah, even very recently. I completely agree with you. We're seen as an SME, small, medium business, right? And our government officials, whether they stick to the silos of tech industrialization, but we're seen as what they call the Juakali sector, those of us who work outside in the sun. And I'm like, okay, that's not the label you need to keep giving us. When you go and benchmark, for example, in Europe and Germany, and they spend hours looking at the big manufacturing plants, I'm saying just come around and see the small, as you call Juakali businesses. If they got 2 machines, the cottage industries would grow in Kenya. In Africa, we could use the technology. We have power 3 days a week, yet we're trying to compete. And I remember asking one of the government officials, it says, did you not invest in a generator? I'm like, okay, fine, that is your answer. We closed the factory at 5 p.m. Which factory closes at 5 p.m.? Doesn't make sense. But we don't have the tertiary education teaching basic carpentry. So we need people. Yes, we have the technologies, but we need the skill sets. We start at 8 and close at 5. Saturday, we close at 12. Doesn't make sense. But the guys who work between 8 and 5 cannot continue a different shift. We need another shift. We need
Right.
babies
True.
are born almost per second billing in Kenya. Our market is huge before we even get to West Africa. Right? But we don't have enough skilled labor, the right skilled, even to operate the technologies that exist. But they don't see the correlation. They say, they put us in a bracket, yeah, you creative types. And they dismiss us. And I'm like, okay, but something has to give.
You took the conversation to something that we're going to get to later on, but I'll just go straight into it, which is training and skills. And Rapalang, I just wanted to bring you in here because this is kind of your where you are now. This
Sure.
how I mean, I'm interested, particularly when you're developing these kind of. Again, I don't want to overuse the word innovation, but just businesses that are trying to do different things and trying to be creative, trying to fix problems, and not following established routes, so to speak. How you find the people that can help you deliver on that efficiency, which you mentioned earlier.
Sure,
And it kind of ties in obviously with what you're also doing as a business.
Sure. Just to follow on from what the previous 2 panelists have also said, I think part of the difficulty with not getting the support from government or the ecosystem is that often even at these platforms we'll talk about how much we maybe need more internet capacity or and those things, but we don't really explain the economic utility that sort of comes out of it. And we need to be drilling down to the details because we're kind of leaving that to the imagination. And unfortunately, our regulators don't have that. And we need, perhaps even through platforms like Quartz, to be translating what does an increase of 5% in bandwidth translate into in
Right,
these
in the
industries
economy,
in a
right.
great deal, what kind of opportunities really manifest. And we're not seeing enough of that detailed link. And that's part of the reason then it becomes difficult, I think, for policymakers to decide to invest more or for even private sectors to decide to work with.
If you have numbers of ministers to give me that data, I will tell those stories.
So
happily.
we need to tell those stories
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
in our minds as young people we can see the link, but I don't think
yeah.
most people
I
can
agree,
actually see
I
the
agree.
link, and we need to bridge that gap. And in terms of the issue of scale, especially around sort of skills in education and the like, I think we already understand how to educate a group of people in a classroom of 30 people, and the issue of scale is that we need to be able to find ways that allow us to achieve some of those same things, but across millions of people at the same time, because it's not going to help us to just be able to do that sort of for those 30 people. And until we sort of crack that, we're going to keep having these chronic issues that some of our panelists are having here. And certainly from my perspective, I think one of the things that we need to be shifting around in terms of education and the like is that a lot of our systems continue to be highly content driven. So we're still pushing out a lot of content, and we're not focusing a lot on how do you shift mindsets, how do you develop independent thought, how do you develop skills of knowing how to learn for yourself. And that's actually the next frontier, I think, of human development that we haven't quite cracked that. We can crack it perhaps in an elite school of small people, of a small number of people, but really understanding how to shift mindsets is not something that we've understood in a great level of detail. And certainly from some of the other panels I've had, even with academics and universities, even if we try to unpack what do we mean when what are the real skills required to say that someone must know how to learn, and we must learn how to learn for ourselves. And we really still can't unpack some of those things. Really don't understand what are the triggers in the human mindset that actually get you that far. And certainly that's some of the research that we're looking into to really try to develop much clearer frameworks about how we would work on mindsets and not just push content, because ultimately we should be in a position where people can learn of their own accord and not have to be pushed content to sort of know something. And then we've reached real scale, when people can learn of their own accord and it's not dependent on a teacher or something else pushing content to them. And that's the major constraint right now, that we haven't quite figured out how to develop that part of our process in the education system.
Bright, do you have any challenges finding people to build your businesses?
So I feel here too there is a problem of siloization, which is big, which is that there's a sense that the educational system somehow is this organism embedded in a bigger organism that, in a Polyankov manner, is different, and therefore we should make education-centric or education-specific policy. I feel the real problem is that intellectual climate as a whole is very important. When you look at world ranking of universities, rarely do German universities rank high. And yet, for some reason, German productivity, German output of innovation, German output of technology is remarkable. Why is that? Because the entirety of German society revolves around this idea of continuous improvement and innovation. Same way you find out that Japanese universities don't rank that high up, and yet still the output of Japanese universities are dramatic. The reason is simple. You need to stop thinking about education as this little organism embedded in a bigger organism and think about the entire intellectual climate of the society. That's one point. The second point I also think is what we're going to continue to see, which is this new idea of cognitive exoskeleton. So the cognitive exoskeleton idea is that we're going to see more tools that enhance the productivity of average performing workers till they begin to perform like servants. And that's very critical. So if we're looking at technologies like artificial intelligence, people have told me, okay, if automation was to be embraced in Africa, we're going to see a lot of people get out of jobs. No, that is silly thinking. We are at a stage where anything that will enhance the productivity of workers will have multiplier effects that expand the economy and allow the absorption of more workers. How does that directly address the point around skilling and talent development on the continent? Twofold. One, we have to start to think about all the other forces in the society that impact young people. Media, to me, is critical. When you pick up a newspaper in Africa, 90% of the content is politics. Yeah. But that 90% of the content that is politics is really big people shouting and lobbing grenades at each other. So it's not even serious politics. Personality politics. Yeah. When you take a newspaper from the UK or take a newspaper from China, invariably, a good chunk of that is engineering stories about getting to Mars at at $1.30 per kilometer, which is what India did when they went to Mars. They spent 1/10 the cost that the US did. And they were the only country that got to Mars on first attempt. You know what? These were front page stories. The Indian press milked the hell out of it because the intellectual climate fosters an encouragement of the sciences, of the humanities, of transformative thinking. How often do our journalists in Africa talk about anything that will inspire a 7-year-old girl to want to create something transformative? So we need to fix the intellectual climate. We can't just leave it to the educational system. Second, teachers themselves. We can't create a system where we make the assumption that the teachers have the skills to do the teaching that is required to change the outcome. And that requires cognitive exoskeletons. What does that mean? It means that the teacher has to be able to go into the system. Maybe the teacher was failed in training college, but there are tools now that enable the teacher to be more productive in class and to be more effective in class. Are those tools available? They are not available because people think of them in terms of fringe elements. I say they are central. If you look at the Ghanaian educational system, and you look at the amount of waste in the Ghanaian educational system, if you cut out that waste using technology, you will educate twice the number of children that are being educated today at twice the level of quality. So it's not a little apps, Rick, and it's not. This is central. It's about making the little money we have go far enough. And it's about getting outcomes that are of extreme levels of quality. And we're not having that conversation. We seem to think that the technology conversation is one conversation on the sidelines. And the main conversation is industrialization, beneficiation. These are all big words. But fundamentally, the mainstream point is improving productivity, improving outcomes. And technology is central to that. I sound like a missionary, but it's true.
I want to get into a couple more things, but I also wanted to open it up for questions from the audience as well. So if anyone has any questions, it'd be really good to hear from you. The other thing, so just if at any point, just put your hand up and we'll come to you. The other thing I wanted to get to was, again, just thinking a little bit about how companies like yours, like the ones on this panel, how you convince investors to take a chance with you when something hasn't been done before. And it's almost an intentionally naive question because if we were having this conversation in New York or London or somewhere like that, it would almost be like it would be an irrelevant question. But when you're trying to convince investors here who probably want to play it safer, right? What are the things that you think they're looking for? How do you get them to see the potential of your innovative idea? Raphael, do you want to try that?
Sure. When you're asking that question, I think the more important derivative of that question is how do you convince your clients or to get clients more?
Right.
I think that's actually should be the bigger focus for entrepreneurs because ultimately most businesses won't ever get external funding. And client revenue is still and remains the best form of funding that you'll ever get. And I think what we do need to be able to achieve to get to that $1 billion valuations of African businesses is big businesses and consumers to be buying more of and be more open-minded to innovative solutions. Very often we want to still sort of refer to something that came from outside or something that's been sanctioned from outside, and that's what's really constraining a great deal of our growth. I remember in our first business, whenever we wanted to launch a new product, we would seed it with a British PR agency, so then only then would the South African media be prepared to pick it up, because that was the fastest way to get it out. Whereas if we started it here, it would take too long because they're not sure, are you real or what? And whereas,
Wow,
that's the kind of shift that needs to happen in all sectors. If we're not willing to buy and bet on our own sort of products and services, we're not going to be able to sell enough, and these businesses are not going to be able to grow big enough to get to those significant valuations. When you do get to sort of the investor side, I think it's, for me, the most important elements of being able to convince investors to work with you really comes down to traction and meaningful actions that you've actually taken on the ground. I think when you've been able to bet your own time and whatever you had in terms of resources to get to a certain place and achieve results, that's really what people are looking for. Too often we still want to rely on maybe an idea or an early stage proof of concept, or I need someone to back me so that I am more confident. That kind of state of mind of entrepreneurship is what sort of, I think, holds too many back. And until you've bet on yourself, because this is your dream, you're not going to be able to win sort of someone over. And it's really just, have you done what you set out to do? It's actually a very, very simple question. And it's the doing that's the most important thing. And I think that's what investors want to see. And when you have that, the conversation becomes a lot more meaningful.
Maxi, in your work, working, because you're sort of in between
Sure.
both sides. I mean, what do you see out there in getting investors to take bets on companies doing, different or innovative things?
Well, I think currently we're experiencing interesting times globally on the continent and also in South Africa. There's a lot of political noise, and it makes it very difficult for capital to flow into startups because of the risk that it entails. So it's a function of how do you, during such trying times, try to convince investors to actually bet on you. But our organization is about ecosystem building. It's about working with venture capitalists, FDIs, people that are investing in small businesses. And essentially, we find that it's a bit of a challenge venture capital in general in Africa, it's a bit of a challenge. In South Africa, more particularly, it's very difficult for us to grow the industry because it's not necessarily, we're not necessarily getting the support from the government. A lot of the money that's flowing, it's from private family offices, it's from private institutions, and we feel that as much as venture capital is very, very risky, if there was some form of co-investment between the government and the private sector, it will leverage that risk. It will underwrite it, or so it will leverage the risk, and more capital will flow. Because the minute you feel that your country actually does believe in investing in startups, early stage investment is very risky. And currently, we just feel that if more capital could flow, if more capital could be leveraged, if there was a sense of co-investment, there will be growth. So we have to essentially, entrepreneurs are always encouraged to bootstrap. But it's difficult to bootstrap when, especially in South Africa, you don't have uncles that you can go ask for money from. They say you have to ask family, fools, or friends. But neither of your family, fools, or friends actually have the money. So it's a triple whammy in Africa. It's a triple whammy in South Africa. But you have to be resilient. You have to, like Rapalang said, ensure that you yourself can look at your customer base, because funding is not necessarily easy, even in established economies. As much as we feel that Silicon Valley it's very fluid with capital, I'm sure they also experience a sense of having to convince your initial investors. So I don't think it's too unique to Africa. I think it's a global phenomenon. But from a policy perspective, we've looked at venture capital creating incentives. So ensuring that in South Africa we have what you call the Section 12J, which is a tax incentive for people that are going to invest in venture capital companies. So how do we ensure that we are creating the necessary incentives from a skills and a capital perspective? And how do we ensure that those particular incentives do work as much as they can be formulated as a tax incentive? Yeah. How do we ensure that people can feel that, well, by investing in startups, I'm actually getting money back? So we still have a long way to go. Policy is something that has to be put forward, and as lobby groups and advocates, advocacy groups, we always constantly having to say, well, you guys are the regulators. However, you need to drop it down to the level of the normal entrepreneur on the ground, the normal VCs that are trying to fund these startups, and how do you help them make sure that they can actually fund them? And in South Africa, we have a lot of funds. There's no shortage of funding in South Africa. However, the access of that funding is very, very critical. And also educating entrepreneurs around, well, you have to make it easier for the banker to see the value proposition, because we tend to have this romance around our own ideas. In our own little heads, or big heads, it makes a lot of sense. Everybody's going to buy it. But you have to now put yourself in the investor's shoes and say, well, am I willing to put my own money into this venture? Am I willing to risk it? Am I willing to lose all of it? And if you can convince an investor that, well, I have worked towards creating a minimum viable product. Yeah. I have actually gone out to the market. I have tested it. I have put a little bit of my money or all my savings. I have sold my house and my car and lost a lot of friends along the journey. You would be a lot of stuff. It could be friends, it could be family, it could be cars, it could be homes. And they have to see that this person is willing to put in the risk, because funding is about risk, it's about managing risk. And right now we need to navigate through a very, very challenging economic, political, and trying times, just generally globally and on the continent, and in particularly in South Africa.
Bryce, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I wanted to make a couple of points about the investment issue, because I think it's very critical. First of all, we need to be very, very clear what the big structural issues are. One, venture capital into technology innovation, that segments of the economy is less than 0.5% of all the incoming FDI. Why is that? That is the case because when it comes to the bulk of the economy, the structural centerpieces of the economy, a lot of new entrepreneurs are shying away. So if you're not in agriculture, if you're not in energy, if you're not in food security, if you're not in the very core centers of the economy, obviously money is not going to come to you. Because of that, let's say $50-something billion of FDI that does not go into technology innovation and startups and the rest. They are going somewhere else. And I was making the point that when you look at power plants and you look at the software that goes into power plants, when you look at big enterprises and their enterprise resource platforms, how much of that is coded in Africa? The fact that the consumer internet is enabling the proliferation of small apps, a lot of minor apps all over the place, does not mean that that is the boundary within which innovation has to play in Africa. We have to be integral to the very large segments of the economy that move the needle. So we're going to have to see African entrepreneurs in technology building more enterprise applications, getting involved in the industrial internet. If we have a situation in Africa where, last time I checked, not a single African technology company builds anything for the industrial internet, that's frightening. So you're not going to see a power plant where a single line of code written for the firmware of the reactor or the turbine comes from Africa. It's not possible. Now, the problem with that kind of arrangement, as we have currently, is that a good chunk of the money goes away. Ghana just signed a power agreement last year with a company where we are buying the power plant in 5 years, BOOT. The funny thing is that in that agreement, which I've read, it says that at the end of the term, when they transfer the power plant to us, the software belongs to them. We have to keep licensing the software. And all the agreements you can think of, look at the industrial part of things, the technology part. The second thing, which I also think is very critical as far as the investment landscape is concerned, is this notion that we can continue to expect venture capital to drive the bulk of it when procurement is not moving in line, when all the other parts of the economy is not moving in line. The government does a lot of the spending in Africa. Half of all formal workers in Ghana are employed by the government. That tells you a lot. And yes, the government spending on technology continues to become completely agnostic of the local economy. Those things can't just be allowed to continue.
We have a question, Elliot.
Thanks very much. Fascinating conversation. My question is about the role of media and journalism in increasing visibility to African startups in particular. I'm wondering if any of the panelists can point to a time where an article was written about you or your business and somebody reached out right after that to say, look, I'm interested, I heard about you in this magazine, etc. I'd like to invest.
I think maybe I can answer on that. Quartz Africa did a fantastic article on us. And I must say that changed the conversation. We've been in this business 7 years. This article was only done the other day. And that changed the game. We get local media in Kenya. Every day, every week, I get a call, can we feature you? And I say no, because the story is not about what I do. The story is about how much money did you start your business with? And it has nothing to do with anything but what we do. So, Quartz Africa, thank you, honestly. I mean, your article was unbelievable. We then had CNN, whom I had refused to do an interview with, because Africa is a ticking hot thing, they say. But the article was amazing. And yes, it featured Michelle Obama as well, and me. But it was unbelievable how the foreign articles or the foreign media, they capture, intelligent questions about our businesses, about the future. But locally, I'm still seen as a woman. Yes, I'm a woman entrepreneur, but it's not a pink business. It's a business, right? When you go to the financial institutions, I'm not going to present a pink business plan. Look at what it does, the impact. Manufacturing, and everybody wonders, but you're a girl. I'm like, don't remind me. Yes, but I know about machines. So there's a problem in how we look at it, how it's portrayed to the education system. Believe it or not, art has ceased to exist as a subject in Kenya. How is that possible? How are we going to design anything if we don't teach art? So there's a big disconnect between what society, the silos, local media and foreign, but coming here for me is my first WEF ever. And I'm just like, wow, this is where I need to live. I can live in WEF world. But I mean, it's a start, but we really need to be doing more. And so if you're here to invest, hi.
I just want to follow on from what she's saying. I think there's a good and a bad side. So I think the good side is what she's saying around in terms of the credibility building. But it actually takes quite a lot of effort to craft really good pieces. And a lot of the time, I'll even still get articles written about me where I didn't necessarily participate and they didn't even bother to find the latest research, and I'm not necessarily hard to find or find the most relevant research on, and then you're reporting on stuff from 7 years ago and it confuses the whole situation, so you're not helping the entrepreneur sort of in that instance. And then in terms of the woman element, I think there's a great deal of disservice that's done when you want to interview me because I'm a woman entrepreneur. You're going to come and interview a man and you're going to ask him strategic questions.
Yes.
You're going to ask him industry relevant questions. He's going to appear smarter by virtue of the questions that you targeted at him. Whereas you're going to talk to me about how's it to be a woman. I'm like, it's the only thing I know. So there's nothing else I can say about it. And that's really, really important sort of as a shift. So, and then the other sort of, I think, negative outcome that can happen is that often I think the media can also create an impression where entrepreneurs are perceived to have, they've cracked everything, they've made a lot of money, they're at the end of their road, which doesn't really give a real representation to young people that are starting out, where there's this sort of hunger or need to pitch people at a certain level when they're all on a journey. And it's like we're uncomfortable with the authentic journey. And that's not great. And a lot of publications sort of do that. And certainly I've been in situations where I'm like, you can't feature me in that thing because everybody else there has made over $10 million. I can't be seen there. People are going to think that I don't need customers or I don't need investors. And you can't, it doesn't serve us to pretend and things, and rather sort of represent a more authentic journey. And I think that even some of the American journalists, they're actually very comfortable. You have two people, okay, that's fantastic. And there's no shame about it. This is your journey. And they're comfortable with the process without the need to being, you've made $1 billion and you've been on the cover of Forbes, and that's the only real story. Whereas that's not real.
To add to that, Elliot, in terms of building a culture of entrepreneurship, building an ecosystem, I think media is very, very important, especially in a country where we don't know who are the entrepreneurs. We don't know what is entrepreneurship. It's about selling those stories, telling those stories, encouraging young people to say, hey, I'm from a village like you. I'm no different. I just made different decisions. Exactly. I just took different levels of risks. And telling those stories, it's quite encouraging. Telling stories of what comes out of your country, because you can't only have Silicon Valley as your point of reference to what entrepreneurship is on the continent or what we're trying to emulate. So media plays a very, very critical role. It's a function of how do you get the right voices, not the same voices. You're constantly having the same faces, the same voices. What about that woman or a man in a village that has created many, many jobs within that village? How do we tell his story? How do we sell his story as well?
Yeah, excellent. We have time for one more question, I think, just a few more minutes.
Hi, my name is Tulanana, a global shaper from Tanzania. I'm a person that's in the media, so just to comment just a little bit about what you're saying, is that a lot of our media houses, at least in East Africa, are owned by politicians or people with political interest. So the banter that you hear all the time, who has done that, it serves their interest in the end run. So maybe that's something to also factor in. Yeah. But my question goes into mindset. We've been talking about risk. And creating an attitude of accepting risk. If you're coming from, if you're a child, and okay, for example, this morning we're doing my morning run. I'm seeing a child surfing on the waves. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, if it was my mother and I was that age, I would know. She'd be like, you're going where? To the water. To do what? And what if something happens, you know? So that attitude of risk from a very young age hasn't been instilled in us. And so I'm asking, where does that mindset, risk mindset shift? Where does it happen? Where do we introduce it? Is it in homes? Are we expecting it to happen in government? Where do you think it should start from?
Can I just answer that? It actually is a part of us. You're from East Africa. I feel every morning we wake up, cross the road is a risk. Taking our public transport system is a risk. You don't know if you'll make it, the accidents. It is what we do. You wake up in the morning, you go to shower, there's no water.
Yeah.
It's all a risk. But we imagine it has to be this thing where you sit and think, I'm going to come up with the most innovative idea. And to some extent, our parents don't know any better. Again, media, what they've seen, right? But if we start showing that car seats, for example, or seat belts, we don't use them. At least in East Africa, not much. That's the most ridiculous and risky thing we do. Risky, but it's not a big deal, right? We'll have 7 people in a car or 4. That is taking a risk on your lives. But we don't look at it in terms of how does that translate into my business? And this thing of failure, if you fail, or if you don't do well in your exam, you are labeled. That is actually the problem. It's about what if you fall while surfing? What will the people say? What if you start a business and it doesn't succeed? You are labeled a failure. That is our problem. It's not about not taking the risk. It's what will your father, your mother, your neighbors say? You tried, it didn't work, but that's how you have to do it. Otherwise, you'll never take the risks.
Right.
I think there is also one very fundamental cultural difference that some of us may not have noticed about the way we run businesses in Africa. We don't yet treat businesses as machines that you need to pump up, psych up, and just go, put it out there and let it make money. There is a lot of identity bound up in business. So I know people for whom their business is very much a part of them. It's their lifelong occupation and things like that. I think that also sometimes stand in the way of investors, they also stand in the way of risk-taking, etc. Because invariably, you're not willing to let somebody come in, take a good chunk of the business and invest. I've had a lot of PE people tell me that, look, I came in and I tried to invest in business, but I just can't get a meeting of minds with the entrepreneur because they're so bound up in the business. The identity and everything else is part of the business. Whereas elsewhere, there is a tendency to treat business as machines. And if you pump it up properly, it's going to go and generate wealth. And maybe, I'm not sure whether we should change it, but we should be acknowledging of that point.
We should be aware of that.
Yeah.
This conversation has been fascinating. I've really enjoyed it, and extremely grateful and proud that you guys are here with Quartz and Quartz Africa. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for attending, and please go to qz.com/Africa17 to see the list of our next 30 innovators in Africa. Thank you very much.